And joining me here, and he's Dan Carter. Dan Carter, ProEnglish Director of Government Relations.
Well, thanks for letting me be here.
ProEnglish, what's your website?
Well, it's proenglish.org.
Okay, that's pretty simple.
It's simple, and it's good for me to remember.
All right, so this is a different angle on border security,
Yes.
Dan, because it's almost along the lines of societal cohesion. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
We come at two angles, and thank you for letting us be on the program, Bill.
You bet.
We believe assimilation is key to this country. Many different backgrounds, and we have one language. I gave you a key ring a minute ago. I want you to read.
Yeah, I'm going to read the back of this.
Why don't you go ahead and read that, if you would?
Yeah, this is a Teddy Roosevelt key ring that Dan gave me here, and on the back of it, it says, we have but one flag. We must also learn one language, and that language is English. President Theodore Roosevelt.
Absolutely. Teddy Roosevelt said that, and I'm a historian as well, and he actually said that. I remember reading that when I said, oh, my goodness, it's really accurate. We think assimilation is important. We think cost of services and goods. I mean, my goodness, friends of mine who are liberal certainly don't agree the way I do. It said, this is a really good angle, Dan, that the cost savings. Your wife works with special needs kids. Why don't you use the money there? I'm thinking, well, liberals say this.
That's interesting to have those from the left calling this out. I'll just give you a small example. I'm a big fan of gadgety watches, right?
Okay.
So here it is. Here's my handy-dandy gadgety Casio that I ended up getting. And the multiple languages that came with it made what should have been a relatively thin instruction book about 3/4 of an inch thick.
Oh, I bet.
I ended up peeling off all the rest of it. Now, I suppose some would say that's actually cheaper for Casio to do that than to print a separate one each and every time. Mm-hmm. So let me just go into the pro-English side. It seems like such a no-brainer. Why has there been such resistance, or they just kind of push it to the side?
Yeah, it's been going around. Steve King, Congressman King from Iowa, has been a champion in the House side.
Good guy. I've talked to him before.
997. He's on a number of issues that I believe personally on societal issues. But in this issue, I interviewed him a few years ago, and it's on our website, my interview of Congressman King. And I said, well, how'd you get into this? He said, I was running for state senate in Iowa, and he was asked, he saw there was a big response to official English, another speaker, and so he started championing that. It took several years. We think that 997, Steve King's bill, the English Language Unity Act, the name of it really is what we're about. It's the Unity Act of 2017.
That seems to be one of the issues that in our culture we're having less and less to agree and to unite on. These United States have become, pretty much a tossed salad.
That's right. And so we now have in this Congress, the 115th, we have 71 supporters. Last year we had, when it was last Congress, the 114th, we had 91. We need to have the number go up. Well, several of our people who were with us last time went on to another office, or they became a member of the cabinet, or so you lose those. But we feel like we have a noble cause because it's saving the country money and at the same time bringing our people together.
Why haven't we assigned importance to it up to this point? Because I'll preface this because the United States of America has always been somewhat of very rich in diversity of language and cultures. There's always been a big part of that.
Yeah,
especially the last 150 years or so.
Sure. I think a number of people who want to use as a reason for not signing say, well, you're not being open-minded. You're being maybe even a racist to say this. I mean, literally, I've had people tell me this in their offices on the Hill, on the House side and on the Senate side. And I say, but you should understand. I almost, I say, you just don't understand. This is about bringing people in. It's not about saying you can't do this. And on the Senate side, Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma has been the champion for this as well for several Congresses. We're just determined we're going to continue to work this.
Where do you get the pushback? Who does the pushback against you?
Well,
against a pro-English point of view.
Well, there are those who are a little tentative. They don't know if their district, if it'll stomach this, they say. And I'm thinking, well, it's not a matter of stomaching. It's just it will really. And all my colleagues in the office that work with me, we have the same response. We get the same response. And so we know there are other issues going on in this country. There must be, 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different issues. But we think this is significant.
Well, there's an actual cost to it, especially in government education. We've talked about this for a long, long time on our program, in that the cost of English as a second language, and it's not just always Spanish being a second language.
No.
You know, people are thinking,
That's right.
you're just bashing people coming from
right.
south of the border. That's not it.
No.
But you look at the expenses that the government school system has to end up tossing out, and there's the government court systems. everybody involved.
We know we know the GAO did a study about 8 or 9 years ago, and it was 2 to 3 billion. That's in B as in boy, dollars a year. EO 13166 signed in August before Bill Clinton went out of office.
Okay, executive order then.
It says an executive order that says, hey, if you have 5% threshold of a language, so Brenda and I vote, my wife and I vote in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Harrison Road, and it says, hey, if you reach 5% of any language, you got to have translators and translation. I always tell offices, $330,000 was spent in Orange County, California in 2014 for translation costs. The Rasmussen poll said over 70% of Americans, 81% of Americans want to have an official language, and that language is English. 81%.
Now, when you talk about 81% wanting English as the official language, this is not to say that you're breaking the law if you're speaking a mother native tongue, let's say.
No. What this says is it's very important to understand this is the official language. I go into a congressman's office or a senator's office, and I'll know ahead of time. I'll say, what committees is your boss on? Well, I know. I'll get them to say Ways and Means or Defense. I say, this means the business, when your boss, the congressman or the senator, is in there, it's in English, and on the floor of the House or the Senate. And it sounds like you shouldn't have to do that. You do have to do that.
Is that a shot across the bow of certain politicians that are now starting to speak in foreign languages?
Well, they're doing it, and they shouldn't be doing it in terms of, certain politicians are doing that. You're right. Some that have even run for office, president, have done that. And we say it's fine to have your own native language. I mean, church I attend in Fredericksburg, Virginia, we have a Hispanic outreach, but we say, we want to be inclusive and bring them into our church. Well, certainly here, we want to bring them into the country. I mean, that's just the American way to bring people in.
So Dan Carter, once again, is ProEnglish Director of Government Relations, so he's always relating to government.
I don't know.
all the time. And do you finally see some progress, people start seeing the light go on, that there is a problem here at some point? And because I'll just give you an example. In Quebec, we know that they fine you if you end up putting up English signs.
Right.
And I'm not necessarily advocating that we fine people for putting up French signs here,
right.
but you get to the point where it's all right for French Quebec to then say, this is our culture, this is our unifying standard, so that we can communicate that we're going to be somewhat cohesive. This is what we're going to push forward, and yet that seems to be a very different reception in the United States.
Well, we know
no one calls them racist, I guess,
right.
for promoting French.
Canada had a real serious problem with that separatist movement a few years back, and and you notice their cost is way high. Senator Sessions, when he was Senator Sessions, now Attorney General Sessions, he used to say, look what happened to Canada. We don't need to have that happen to the United States in terms of a separatist movement.
But yet, in a way, it illustrates your point that language can be a uniting force, or it can be a divisive force, as it was in the case of French Quebec.
Yeah, exactly. And the flag, in my office, I have a flag, a mounted flag on a nice plaque, and the language. It's the key ring thing I told you. So we really feel that's significant, and it makes a difference.
Dan Carter, once again, he's the Pro-English Director of Government Relations. What do you see then as the top 3 reasons besides the cost? Because some people will say, hey, we're a wealthy country. I mean, so what if it ends up costing a lot of money? So what? It costs a lot. All right. You got to have a bunch of translators everywhere, and so what?
Well, we think that it's divisive not having a common language. We know that when you fly across the country, across the world, it's English. Rasmussen poll talked about people wanting to have it. We have members of senators and congressmen don't know that it's not an official language. It's an education thing that my colleagues.
No, hold on. Wait a minute. What do you mean that there are congressmen
and senators
that don't know?
Yeah, I've gone into offices, and it happens all the time. My colleagues with me now, we'll go in an office, and accidentally the congressman's coming out. I didn't have an appointment with them, I had with their staff, and they said, well, and I introduced myself, and they said, yeah, and they say something like, sometimes I have it said, oh, we don't have it's not an official language now. I mean, I could tell you song and verse who these are. I won't do that. But it's.
Oh, come on.
That's
come on.
No. Okay, well here they are. No. So it's discouraging because
he doesn't want to cause trouble for him in the future. There, he wants to be able to walk into the congressman's room.
Right.
All right.
And they don't. This divisiveness is real. On the other hand, if I can bring you in, if you bring me in and say, Dan, we want you to be part of this country, that's pretty united. Our chairwoman is from Italy, Rosalie Porter, and she came as an 8 or 9 year old girl, and so she's gone through this whole process. Well, I worked with Elaine Chow. I mentioned that when she was Secretary of Labor. I worked with her. So there's a lot of folks who've done this. That don't forget your heritage, but on the other hand, if you promote this the right way, you can increase yourself and be in a position.
There has certainly been a change, I would say, in our culture, and this really is a cultural issue. This is where culture and government intersect here. And I recall how former President Clinton used to say, it's the economy, stupid. And I would say that most of the battles that we're suffering and enduring these days have to do with corrosion of culture. And that's why
right.
I can see the appeal of something like this. What do you think would be a challenge of making English an official language? Because I'm not talking about the hurdles legislatively, but you have a good percentage. And I'll be honest, you'll visit a place like Laredo, Texas, in which English is far down the list of languages that tend to be used. And, a lot of these border towns are, in effect, they're sort of in between the United States of America and Mexico, really, in their culture and in their language and their law.
We by no means are trying to say change anyone's culture. On the other hand, we say English is the official language, is an enabler to make the country go stronger. And that's your position. For instance, if I were to move to France, I would be expected to understand French, and even though I took it in college and didn't do that well. But
it's funny you bring that up because when we visited the Louvre, that's just it. Yeah. At first, we were a little bit miffed because we're in the Louvre, which is the the French art French museum. And we're there, and it's like no English subtitles here on anything. And then a little miffed, and then wait a minute.
Wait.
This is France. We're in France.
That's right.
When in France, you do as the French.
This is a common sense thing. I was talking to a congressman down the hall earlier who's being interviewed, and we talked a little bit, and I told him we appreciated his support. And I said, what's so sad is what you're doing is common sense, and you're doing to promote our country. It's huge. And he says, well, Dan, he says, it's hard to somehow tell that to my fellow members of the House. This was a congressman. And that's what we're up against. It's a challenge. A challenge is not saying you can't have it at your church or at a grocery store or Macy's or Wegmans.
Let's say you do a Latin Mass in Catholic, and all of a sudden you got the feds coming down. That's not what you're talking about.
We're talking about official business, and we mean on the floor of the House or the Senate. We mean in the committees. And
what about in courtlerooms, places like that?
There are provisions for this. I mean, it has to be in English, but these are state usually. Of course, we have a dual system.
Okay.
But let me say this about when Clinton's EO 13166 executive order.
Of course, he's probably disavowing it now.
No, I don't know. I don't think he does.
Okay.
But when the Secretary of HHS said, when Obamacare was coming through, Affordable Care Act, she said, we'll publish in every language in this country. Well, there's a prime example. I used to go in the offices, and it's on a hand card. It was to the ceiling. I mean, it was the most amazing thing. I'd go home every day telling my wife I didn't knock it over today. People Republicans use the example. Mm-hmm. The darn thing, there are 313 languages or dialects in this country. When a syllabus,
do you have to print it all of those?
Yes, that's the case. That's expensive, and it was thousands upon thousands of pages. And so that's what I'm talking about. It's a multiplication thing. Someone's got to pay for it. I always ask someone who's a little reticent to sign this. I'll ask the LD, the legislative director. I said, who's going to pay for that in whatever state you're in? And they said, well, the taxpayer. So, gee, that means it's going to be less services and more taxes. That doesn't mix very well for Dana and Brenda, and John Q. Citizen.
So do you think that the cost is the most effective way?
I think I've been told by people pitch the cost, but I also think, and as I've studied this myself, it's assimilation.
Well, the other thing, how do you get along with your fellow man if you and your fellow man are never? I mean, it's bad enough that most people don't seem to know their neighbor, but then if we're talking foreign language barriers, it gets even worse. This is the culture again, stupid.
It's the culture, right? And and so great, the economy's doing good, but why aren't we in the same area. We need to have everyone in a language that's a unifier. And Teddy Roosevelt, though he did have some different views I didn't totally all agree with, but he did have this one. This is a very strong view that we should have a unifying part of our country, the flag, the language.
Dan Carter, Pro-English Director of Government Relations. It's ProEnglish.org. And you take donations and all that
we do all that stuff, but you said that our website is proenglish.org, and it's a wealth of information on there. Interviews I've conducted with congressmen and senators, just a host of information. You have a question about your state, or is your congressman or senator signed up? Well, you can punch it in.
Okay, you certainly will take a look at that. I'm surprised. It is a very different time. I mean, most of my ancestors came in the big immigration rush of the late 1800s, right? Mm-hmm. And for them, I recall even my great-grandfather Yakshi, it was a matter of pride that he learned English, and he still spoke the mother tongue at home, and he would teach me how to count and do all those other things. I guess, though, is it that we don't really have that love for the country, for the common culture?
I don't know that. I don't want to get real depressed here on that. No. But my point is, if we don't stand up for the things that are right, and this is something that's certainly right, I feel very strongly about it, and I think that now's the time for us to draw a line in the sand. Karl Rove, who used to be with President Bush, used to say, anything that polls over 70%, you ought to look at it. Well, 81% Rasmussen poll, it's in the folder I left with you. 81% of Americans want to have an official language, and they want it to be English. Well, goodness gracious.
81%, that is pretty much a very, very strong majority.
That's a strong, and that was only done 3 months ago, this survey.
3 months?
Yeah.
So you're not talking about going back 15, 20 years?
No.
All
3 months.
Okay, we'll take that to the bank then, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Good meeting you, and great having you on the show again.
For us being here.
7:53 live from Hold Their Feet to the Fire, Washington, D.C. on the Bill Myers Show, KMED and KCMD.
This is the Bill Myers Show on KMED and KCMD. This